Guys, it is 12:17 a.m. and I literally just got home from seeing Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, and I honestly could not wait to get on here and tell you guys what I thought about it. One thing about me is I'm always going to be extremely honest with you, especially since these videos aren't monetized in any capacity. I'm not being paid to say what I say. I just want to give you my honest, true opinions on everything that I see. So before we get started doing that, I want to preface this with a bit of a disclaimer. I am not here to discuss whatever socio-political issues you might have with this film from a conceptual sense. If you are here to have your bias that the movie is woke DEI trash or anything like that, click away now. This is not that video. There's plenty of content for you on this platform. This is just not the video that you're going to want to watch. Now, with that having been said, I'm about to gush over this movie for the next 20, maybe 30 minutes, so please bear with me while I do that. First of all, I just want to say that nothing that you might have been concerned about is even remotely an issue. I know people were saying, like, the armor doesn't look right, or it's weird to have Travis Scott in this movie, or whatever. None of that matters. Travis Scott, I honestly barely even noticed him. The armor, while it's not necessarily the most historically accurate thing in the world, it completely fits the tone and atmosphere of the film. Beyond that, I want to first talk about the performances. I've heard people say Tom Holland is weak in this film. I could not agree less with that take. I think that he's putting up easily the best performance of his entire career so far, at least from what I've seen. I've always thought Tom Holland was a good actor, but sometimes I do struggle to see anything other than Peter Parker when I look at him. There is a little bit of that present here, but I think that he is, like I said, he's delivering the single greatest performance that I've ever seen from him. However, he's kind of overshadowed by the fact that this cast is full of such heavy hitters, and they're also putting up Oscar-level performances. Matt Damon is channeling something I don't think I've ever seen from him before, and I've watched a lot of Matt Damon movies. I've seen Good Will Hunting, I've seen Bourne, I've seen The Martian. I've seen so many different sides of this actor before. I honestly did not think that he had anything left that he could surprise me with, and I am so happy to be wrong about that. Also, Anne Hathaway, generational performance. She is beyond incredible in this movie. John Bernthal, who I honestly never really thought was the strongest actor, phenomenal in this movie. There's John Bernthal isms in there, but he delivers this pseudo Shakespearean dialogue with such authenticity, with such emotion, with such conviction that he's able to convince you of just about anything. And on the dialogue, I do want to talk about this for a little bit as well. I've seen people complain that it's too modernized, that they shouldn't have, simplified it for modern audiences. I've seen movies like the recent Macbeth film with Denzel Washington that, they fully lean on that old periodic dialogue, and sometimes it works. But it also is not something that I necessarily have ever cared too much about when it's not there. I appreciate it when it is, but I've never considered something bad for not having it. I'm not gonna say that the God of War games are bad because the dialogue doesn't necessarily fit what I think it should be based on the setting and the world that it takes place in. I think based on what I'm getting from this tone and from this atmosphere, the dialogue is perfectly appropriate, just like the costume design is. I also want to say that in an era where, movies start to feel like products and pieces of a corporate machination in the middle of this huge world of franchises that we have and everything, there are still true auteurs. There are still people in this industry who are trying to create the grandest, the most transformative, the most defining pieces of art that this medium is capable of. And Christopher Nolan is one of them. And I go back and forth on Nolan so much because I love The Prestige, can't stand The Dark Knight Rises. Oppenheimer I thought was life-changing. I thought Tenet was extraordinarily boring. So obviously, he's not perfect, but I think that he is putting everything that he has into the Odyssey, and so is everybody else involved. Ludwig Göransson, he's on a generational run right now. I mean, he won Oscars for Oppenheimer, he won an Oscar for Sinners, he won an Oscar for Black Panther. He's going to win an Oscar for the Odyssey. The music and the sound design, they work so well in tandem with what you're seeing on screen, with what you're seeing in the performances. The music is like another character in the movie helping to tell the story. What just fell over? I don't even know. But the music is part of the world, part of the story, working with everything else in tandem to portray the emotion and the feeling. And yes, that's what music is for, but it's done so expertly here that to not acknowledge it feels irresponsible. It's an age-old rule in storytelling, especially in filmmaking, that what you don't show is equally as important as what you do show. And in a film like this, what you don't hear is equally as important as what you do hear. For instance, the siren song is such an important part of the story. And to hear Odysseus describe the impact that it has on you as a person is so much more powerful and so much more interesting than hearing it for yourself. But it goes beyond that, right? We hear a very muffled sound of just Matt Damon screaming his head off, just Odysseus being anguished and tormented in front of all of his men, while the rest of them have the wax in their ears so they don't hear it. Obviously this is mild spoilers, but this is a 3,000-year-old story, and it's so good because you can say, oh, maybe Nolan just hadn't thought about what it would sound like, but I don't think that that's the case. I think they knew exactly what the siren song would sound like, but we as the audience are not allowed to hear it because no man is meant to hear it. No man who hears it survives. Odysseus is the only one, not even us as the audience are allowed to know what it sounds like because it's not meant to be heard. I go crazy for this type of stuff, man. The cave scene with the Cyclops, I keep wanting to call it the Colossus, with the Cyclops, people have said this before, and they'll continue to say it after this, but it is indicative of the fact that Nolan needs to get off his ass and make a horror film already. I'm sick of him not doing it. I don't know what he's waiting for. The claustrophobia that you feel, and the dread and the tension of the unknown, especially if you're someone who's read the Odyssey, you don't necessarily know what the Cyclops wants. You know that he knows that Odysseus and his men are in that cave, and you wonder what's stopping him from killing all of them and eating all of them. Maybe the Cyclops isn't a monster. Maybe he's just a person, just a being, the same as anyone else. This movie, the themes of the Odyssey are about empathy and compassion and respect in all directions, and it's so beautiful. It I don't know, I felt so thoroughly moved, and not just by that, but there's also a monologue that Odysseus gives towards the end of the film. I don't want to spoil the final act or anything, but there's this monologue that he gives that's interlaced with all of these flashbacks that recontextualize the very beginning of the film. And it's so perfect, it's so epic, no pun intended, in such a way that it is honestly hard to put into words, but it's a twist that's kind of right in your face. It flips the concept of the film on its head, because if we're being honest, the Odyssey is many things. It's a cautionary tale of, man meets myth. It's a coming of age story. It's a story of survivor's guilt. It's so many different things all working together. And in a way, it kind of laid the groundwork for so many stories that have come after. They kind of all follow in the footsteps of the Odyssey. For crying out loud, the word mentor comes from the Odyssey because of the character named Mentor. And it's so fascinating to me because I feel like there's not a single scene in this film that doesn't leave a lasting impact, whether it's Cersei's shack or the shores of Hades, especially, oh my god, Elliot Page, with his very minimal time on screen, delivers such an impactful performance. And, in a way, even though he's not on screen very much, his presence is very much something that moves the entire story along, and it's beautiful. It all works so well for me. I also want to talk about the gods, because Athena is the only god that you actually see on screen. But even then, it's kind of left to interpretation. It seems obvious that she's meant to be a god, but it's also like, is she representative of something? Is that left for interpretation? And honestly, either way that you look at it, it works beautifully. Nolan talked about his decision to more or less leave the gods out of the story, kind of allowing the audience to see the gods the way that these men do. Most people in Greece would not have seen the gods or been visited by the gods very often. Instead, they just feel their presence and they see their work. That works for me incredibly well, especially because of how important Poseidon and Zeus are to this story. You don't see them, but you feel their presence, you feel their power. Every rogue wave, every time the sea bucks against Odysseus and his crew, you feel that that's the work of Poseidon. The fact that these people are so hungry, the fact that they're starving to the point of desperation, why don't they go fishing? They can't. Poseidon will not allow them to have fish. That's how deep his influence runs in this story. Anytime you hear the crack of thunder, you feel Zeus, you feel his rage, his wrath, the fury that he has for not just Odysseus, but for all of Greece, for mankind at large. It's very evocative of, of Noah's Ark. The Battle of Troy is evocative of what happens in Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm not here to, delve into this whole religious tirade. That's not my goal here. It's just, there's parallels across all of history, really, especially when it comes to that of faith. And again, it moves me on a level that I very rarely ever get to experience from a film. And I'm just realizing there's somebody I haven't even mentioned. Robert Pattinson. It's no secret to anyone who has seen The Lighthouse or The Batman or The King that Robert Pattinson is possibly the greatest actor of his generation. I mean, I see him in something every year. I mean, I it's like a constant reminder anytime I see him on the big screen, just how incredible and amazing he is and how criminal it is that he hasn't received an Oscar yet. The simple fact that he is a compelling character in a movie like Tenet, where you can hardly get attached to anybody, it's just, it goes to show that he's leagues above his peers. And it's honestly astonishing that he was ever in Harry Potter, of all things. But his performance here as Antonua... Oh, wow. Let me try again. Antinous. I hope I never have to say that name again the whole rest of this video. But his performance as the character is so complicated and so layered. Because without getting into too much detail, he's a character who's very much a rat. He's hardly considered a man. He's conniving, he's sniveling, he's a coward in every sense of the word. But you can also see, just in Robert's performance, that there's the building blocks of what could have and should have been a great man, somebody who could have been nobility. Maybe if he had the chance to fight at Troy, then maybe he would have been remembered as a hero, as a great soldier, as a great man. but it's like there was shame eating him alive from the inside that twisted him into what he is now, and that is also just to be able to portray that just through your performance, not even through anything that's written into the script, but Robert just delivers that in his performance, and he is out of this world. His work, especially with Anne Hathaway, because I know I praised her early in the video, but she doesn't even have all that much screen time, but to portray the rage of someone who's so loyal to a man that she has no reason to believe she will ever see again other than sheer hope and understanding of who Odysseus is as a man. She understands his character so well that she knows there is nothing that would keep him from coming back to her. That's why she won't take another husband. That's why she won't even think about entertaining these suitors, especially because none of them want her heart. They want her status. They want her power. They want the reputation that they will achieve by taking her as a wife. And she plays it all so wonderfully. And seeing this after Devil Wears Prada 2, it's astonishing that this is the same actor. I guess I should also touch briefly on Agamemnon. He's not in the film very much because this is not the Iliad, but there's something so interesting about him. There's a very deliberate choice to never truly show his face. He's either filmed from behind or with his face shrouded in shadow because of his helmet, and he is like a myth brought to life. Does that make any sense? He's not just a man. He's not just a soldier. He's not just the general of this Greek army. He's statuesque in appearance and in stature. I hate to say it, but his aura fills the entire screen. He stands there motionless as soldiers pour into the city of Troy on either side of him. And then when he does start to move, he's like Greek Darth Vader. It's hard to describe it any other way. It's poetry. This whole movie, oh my god, it's poetry. There's something so moving about the way I mentioned it earlier, but that monologue that Matt Damon delivers towards the end of the movie, it's poetry. It's simply spoken poetry put to screen, and there's so much visual poetry as well that, dude, I don't even know where to go next. The thing I find interesting is as the story goes on, and obviously Odysseus loses more and more men, and his party gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and it seems as though every decision he makes leads to catastrophe. Every call of his is the wrong one. You kind of have to wonder, what is it about this man that makes him so great? Why is he chosen? Why does he get to live while everyone else dies? And it's because in a tragic, because this is Greek after all, in a tragic and poetic sense, he is chosen. He is basically Zeus's perfect soldier. This whole story is about Zeus's law of kindness and hospitality, and Odysseus believed in it so heavily that it almost brought about ruin for his own people and for his own home. And this concept is perverted in a way that I won't really get into, but the entire rest of the movie is kind of the consequences of this simple act, of this one decision, this one thing that perverts the idea of Zeus's will. And so Odysseus is transformed in a way into a vessel of Zeus's will and of Zeus's wrath. It's not just about him returning home so that he can be with his wife again, so that he can see the man that his son has grown up to be, but it's so that he can deliver vengeance and deliver justice for the wrongs that have been committed in his name and under his watch and in service of his law. And it's so good. Dude, I can gush about this movie forever. I also want to give a shout out to John Leguizamo. I don't think I've ever been moved by a performance from him in my entire life. This is Sid the Sloth we're talking about. This is, what's his name, Arturo from John Wick. A guy that was kind of comic relief in a certain aspect in the menu. But here he turns, I don't know, there's something about Nolan that he brings out the best performance I've ever seen from every single one of these actors, except for maybe Charlize Theron and Zendaya. They don't have a whole lot of screen time, and they don't necessarily maximize the screen time that they do have in the same way that I've seen them do in other films. You know, we don't necessarily have a Furiosa level performance from Charlize, and we definitely don't have a Chani in Dune Part 2 level performance from Zendaya. But that's totally fine. They are by no means bad in this film. To go back to that monologue by Odysseus one last time, there's a subversion of a prophecy that's told earlier in the story, and it ties back into. I'll also mention Helen of Troy for a brief moment here. She does not have a whole lot of screen time either. However, obviously, as being Helen of Troy, a lot of what's happening can be traced back to her. And there's a moment between her and Telemachus where the movie kind of slows down and allows you to reflect on that, because it's in regards to atrocities that are committed in her name. You know, what happens to her is what launches these 1,000 ships that people on YouTube and Twitter can't stop talking about. The face that launched 1,000 ships is not in reference to just she's so beautiful that 1,000 people, or that 1,000 ships went to war over it. It's that what happened to her was such an affront that's what started this Trojan War, and that's what leads to the Trojan horse and to obviously the Battle of Troy, and everything that happens to Odysseus and to Agamemnon and to everyone that fought for the Greek army afterwards. And it's God, hang on, give me 1 second. I just don't know if I've ever seen a film that gets so much mileage out of less is more and show don't tell than this one does. There's so much symmetry and so much poetry. I keep saying poetry and poetic and whatever else, but like it's hard to find anything else that describes this movie. I honestly cannot recommend this film enough, and I am so unbelievably envious of anybody who lives within a reasonable distance to a theater that actually shows IMAX and 70mm. I wish that I had that. There's not a theater like that within 10 hours of me. It's actually ridiculous. But even seeing it in a regular theater, the sound was so immersive, was so integral to the experience of the film. I mean, honestly, it makes me yearn for the future when I have a home IMAX theater set up and I can get at least close to what the intended experience was. If you live close to a theater that shows IMAX and 70mm, I legitimately believe owe it to yourself to experience this film in that way, the way that it is meant to be seen. And if I have to give the Odyssey a number score, it is a 10 out of 10. The only complaint that I have about this entire movie, this whole 3-hour film, is that the Trojan horse looks too much like a movie prop. If that's my only complaint about the movie, it's no less than a masterpiece. And I cannot wait to see what Nolan does next. I hope that Pattinson gets to be the lead of Nolan's next film. I want to see this movie win Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Director, Best Picture, Best Lead Actor, Best Lead Actress, Best Supporting Actor, Best Editing, Best Production Design, Best Sound Mixing, Best Original Score. I just want it to sweep the Oscars, not just because it deserves it, but because I know it'll make the right people angry. And, I can't think of any other film coming out this year, with the sole exception of Dune Part 3, that I think could even be half as good as this. I think Spider-Man Brand New Day is going to be a great movie. I think Resident Evil is probably going to be really good. But this is... I don't know. I think that this is legitimately a film that defines not even just this decade, this century so far. It's a The same way that I considered Sinners to be transformative last year, The Odyssey is transformative, and I cannot wait to watch it again. You have to go see this movie. That's all I got for you. I gotta get out of here.